Mr. Scott Ritter, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Propaganda & Co. Studios here in Tampa, Florida. It's Temple Terrace, Florida, as you learned today. It's a pleasure to have you. You know, Scott, I've been watching your content for many years now, and I can't believe you're sitting right here in front of me, but it's an honor and a pleasure to have you here. And I just want to share this story, how I discovered you. Like most people, I think they could probably relate to this story, but when Russia first invaded Ukraine, as you can imagine, there was a blitz of media, and it was mostly kind of similar to Israel-Palestine, but a lot of atrocity propaganda, a lot of anti-Russia propaganda, and I just didn't feel comfortable getting my news from mainstream media, and I felt like I can't trust what these people are saying. I want to know what's actually happening on the ground. I don't want to hear Don Lemon on CNN or any of these other CNN pundits who have a reputation of lying to us. I don't want to get my information from them. So I started digging, but when the algorithm doesn't know what you're looking for at first, it can take some time. So I was searching, finding different YouTube channels, and eventually I stumbled upon an interview between you and Judge Napolitano. And that's when I first started hearing another perspective, an opposing perspective, you can say, about the Russia-Ukraine war. And I was shocked to hear how many soldiers had been dying in this battle, in this war, and just getting a completely different perspective. And I just started digging deeper and deeper and deeper and hearing you talk about so many different issues. So I learned so much about you and gained a lot of respect for you. So I'm very happy to have you here in the studio. And I just want to thank you again for being here. Now, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that story. That's probably how they discovered you as well, whether it came to Russia-Ukraine or Israel-Palestine. You've amassed a massive following. I'm sure a lot of people already know your story, but I'd like to begin by learning more about you, your youth, your upbringing. If you could tell us about your early life, what it was like.
No, my father was a career Air Force officer, so I was born into a military family during the Cold War. And this, I think that's important to point out because that shaped who I was, a child of the Cold War. Some of my earliest memories are when my father had to do a year-long emergency deployment to Turkey. Later on, I found out why. It's related to the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Jupiter missiles that we had in Turkey were dismantled and removed as part of the deal to get Russian missiles out of Cuba. But to replace the nuclear strike capacity, the United States Air Force deployed F-100 Super Sabre aircraft on nuclear strip alert, which means that outside of Izmir, Turkey was an air base, Chile air base, where the missiles used to be. Now you have F-100 fighters on the ramp, fueled up, pilot in the cockpit, nuclear bomb underneath, ready to rock and roll. And my father was part of that squadron that deployed there to take on this nuclear mission, and he was gone for a year. And I remember him coming home. I remember being at the airport to greet him as he came off the airplane, and it's one of my earliest memories. I also remember him going to Vietnam, and then I remember him going to Korea again after the Pueblo incident, where the USS Pueblo was captured by the North Koreans. His fighter squadron was sent to South Korea because we thought we might have to be going to war with North Korea. So, having your father not home and trying to understand why he wasn't home, and the concept of an enemy, the concept of a power out there that was dangerous enough to require my father to leave home to defend us from this threat, resonated deeply in my psychology. As you grow up, you begin to learn more about the world. Vietnam was an abstract in the 60s because I was, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. But when I hit my early teens, it became more real. We were living in Hawaii. My father was part of the Vietnamization process. He was responsible to go to South Vietnam to transition the South Vietnamese Air Force to fighter aircraft that wouldn't require the American Air Force to back them up. And I remember when Saigon fell, watching that on TV. This is a place that your father had deployed to. We were their allies, and now they're gone. And then the boat people came out, and then we took in a refugee family. So we had a South Vietnamese refugee family living with us in the summer of 1975. And it's to see the impact of war and to see, people that are dislocated, they lost everything. I remember I was fascinated by the North Vietnamese advance. So I would watch the news, and I had, like most boys my age, I made dioramas. So I got these little H2 scale soldiers. I paint them, and I did a diorama of the North Vietnamese tank crashing over into the U.S. Embassy. And I did this diorama, and I remember the two South Vietnamese boys coming in and looking at it, and one of them ran away crying. And I was like, why is he crying? But then it sort of sank in how insensitive I was to the fact that this was their nation that had fallen. They had lost everything. And so that, you start becoming aware that, there's a human element to this. I started going to high school in Hawaii. Then my dad got orders back to Turkey. And so I spent the second half of my 9th grade, all of my 10th grade, and my first half of my 11th grade in Ankara, Turkey, which was just a mind-blowing experience. In the 1970s, there was a lot of turmoil in Turkey at the time. I know that near the end of my time in Turkey, the school bus, we lived in the economy, which means we lived in the city, and then we'd have these Bluebird school buses come in and pick us up. You had a red route and a blue route. They'd go through the city, pick you up, and take you to the school, which was at Balgat Air Base. And I remember as we were going through downtown Ankara, there were two Grey Wolf Devgench terrorists chasing our bus, shooting at us with pistols because we were Americans. And then the Turkish police...
You were on the bus when that happened?
Yeah. And the Turkish police ran by us and shot them dead.
In front of you? You witnessed that?
Yeah. And You're just sitting there going, this is the coolest thing in the world.
That's one way to describe it.
Because you don't understand what's going on. You're just going, wow. And Turkey was just a wild, wild west. It wasn't all bad. I mean,
no, you're right. That was
I was
tumultuous time.
introduced to Muslim culture. I became enmeshed in Turkish history. And so it was just coming to a strange new world, learning a new language, meeting people with different culture, different language, different religion, different traditions. But then you throw into it just this Wild West aspect of it. I always say that it was the best place in the world for a teenager to be raised and the worst place in the world for parents to have teenagers. Mm-hmm. Because my mom must have lost, I don't know how much gray hair came in because of just every day was worrying about her.
Yeah,
she
the
was
stress of living there.
Very, very nervous. And then we moved from Turkey in my junior year to West Germany. And again, that's where you become aware of. In Turkey, the Cold War was real in an abstract way. And what I mean by that is everybody's father did something weird. And so you learned that this guy's father worked at the nuclear test seismic facility outside, top secret facility nobody's supposed to talk about except everybody's talking about because his father worked there. This guy's father was CIA. This guy's father ran a SIGINT operation out of Sinop. This guy's father did this, that, because it was just basically a spy versus spy world in there, a whole bunch of espionage and stuff related to the Cold War happening there. So it was sort of exciting from that standpoint. You get to West Germany, and it's a different kind of Cold War. It's a real one. Tanks, airplanes, artillery, helicopters, moving all the time. And you realize that, this is serious, that over the border, just right down the road, is the Soviets. And at that time, we thought they're getting ready to come towards us. And to be a kid, this is what we lived. I don't know if, people in high school today can relate. I mean, I'm not saying that their experiences are worse or better or whatever, but to live in a state of perpetual preparation for war every day.
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about nuclear war and gender. Not to open up that discussion, but yeah, they're two completely different conversations.
And for us, nuclear war was real. I lived when we lived in a little town called Marnheim. Right down the road was North Point, and it's a nuclear weapons storage facility. And we knew that if there was going to be a war, that place was going to get hit. And every once in a while, my father worked at a headquarters, and if there was a crisis, he was part of the staff that went into the bunker. The bunker, of course, is a nuclear fallout shelter designed to allow them to continue operations in case of a nuclear war, which is okay for him. But meanwhile, his wife and his kids are above ground, back at ground zero for the nuclear war. And so, when he went down to the shelter, he didn't know what would happen. I mean, when it came time to come out of the shelter, would his family still be there? And
would you say that the fear was real?
It was visceral, as real as it gets, because it was the reality of our life. We in one village I lived in, the first village we lived in was the village of Schlodenbach. It's outside of Kaiserslautern, rolling hills, beautiful, and we arrived in the fall of 77, and they have an exercise called the Return of Forces to Germany exercise, Reforger. And basically the concept is we have about 300,000 American soldiers stationed in West Germany. But if the balloon goes up, we're going to fly in another 300,000. Within 10 days, they'll come in, they'll get off the airplane, they'll marry up with their equipment that's already positioned there, and then they'll forward deploy to their fighting positions. And it just so happened that the 8th Infantry Division, their fighting position was Schlodenbach, meaning that if there was a war, this is where they were going to establish their forward defensive position because they anticipated the Soviets would be there right now. So Schlodenbach was going to be on the front lines of the future war. And you come home from school, you're eating dinner, and there's just tanks going everywhere, dug into the farm fields. And I remember at Christmas time, we and the Germans would make thermoses of coffee and tea and go out into the field and give warm drinks to the soldiers who were freezing to death. But they were there because that's where the war was going to be if it happened. It wasn't theoretical. This was as real as it got. If there was a crisis and my dad went down the bunker, my parents had a code that they had worked out. It's based upon a book from the 1960s, a Cold War book called Alas, Babylon. It's about nuclear war. And so if my dad called up and said, Alas, Babylon, it meant he was going away and that my mom should probably get the kids together and maybe look through family photographs, try and calm everybody down because waiting for it to happen. And there were 2 occasions where he said that, and my mom gathered everybody together. And then, the night ends, and now it's time to go out and get on the school bus, but you're still like, Dad's in the bunker. So I'm going to go to school now 40 miles down this way, but Dad's in the bunker. And all you could think about while you're in class is, Dad's in the bunker. That means it could happen. When I say it could happen, imagine going to football practice, and down the road there, trucks are going by, and imagine every time the sun hits the rearview mirror, and you get a little flash. Instead of going, oh, that's just a reflection on the rearview mirror, going, is that it? Is that the nuclear bomb? And that was my life. That was everybody's life.
Was that traumatic for you in any way?
I wouldn't call it traumatic. I would say, though, that it was, today I try to impart on the next generation the danger of nuclear war. I just think Americans don't understand how dangerous nuclear war is because they haven't lived it. It's been so far removed from reality that now that, today we're in a situation that because of what's going on in Ukraine, we are closer to a nuclear war than we have been at any time in our history. We are in more danger of imminent nuclear conflict than we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but nobody cares. Nobody's worried about it. Nobody's losing sleep. Nobody's looking at the glint in the rearview mirror saying, is that it? Because they don't understand. The movie Oppenheimer came out, won an Academy Award, won several Academy Awards. I watched the movie. I walked out of the movie and I said, that bomb didn't scare me. And I think we're at the state today where, because of special effects, because of, you go watch Dune and, people are so like, ooh. And so when you see a nuclear bomb go off, you're like, oh, well, that's
just another movie.
It's just another movie. It's not a big deal. No, ladies and gentlemen, it's as real as it gets. And when it goes off, see, Dune's fake. That's fake. That's all CGI stuff. When the bomb goes off, it's real and you're going to die. And you better pray you're going to die. Because if you don't die instantly, then you're going to get radiation sickness, or you're going to die of starvation, of disease, because the world is going to end. And that's the reality of nuclear conflict. And I grew up understanding the danger of nuclear war, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And so I think that was my childhood, that thing. But the other thing it imbued me with was an overwhelming sense of patriotism. Again, I'll give you an example. When we went to Turkey in 1974, the Turks had invaded Cyprus, and the United States put sanctions on Turkey, and the Turks were very angry. So at the Bolgat Air Base, which was where the American school was, where American headquarters were, the commissaries, a small American community, no housing, but that's where the Americans hung out. The Turks made us take the American flag down. They wouldn't let us fly the American flag at Bolgat. The only place the American flag flew now was at the U.S. Embassy downtown. And so, and as an American, that's the symbol of your nation. And again, I think that's something that people today, that there's not the connectivity. People see the flag and they're just like, it's the flag. When I saw the flag, that was the symbol of my country. That meant America. That meant it was the living symbol of my nation. That's how I was raised, that the flag was treated as a living being. And now it's gone. And it literally was like ripping something out of your heart. You're missing something. On the 4th of July, 1976, the bicentennial, the Turks allowed us to raise the American flag. And we had the July 4th picnic. And I remember when they came out, the band was playing, and up goes the flag, the Star-Spangled Banner. We had maybe 1,000 people there. Every one of them was bawling their eyes out, watching the flag go up, crying tears of love and joy. And you're just looking at it and you're saying, God bless America. God bless America. Because it meant something. And it was a symbol you love. Plus, the other thing is, you're in Turkey, and I love Turkey. I loved it. I will never put it down, but it wasn't America. And when you got home to America, you're like, I appreciate America now. But I don't think people understand the patriotism, because I talk to kids today. They're just not patriotic. They're not anti-American, but their vision of America is a completely different concept.
Why do you think that is?
I think, first of all, that America's betrayed its trust in the people. I mean, the America that I supported, remember, we were just coming off of Watergate. And so there was already people beginning to question, the idea, pre-Watergate, the president was the president. I mean, but then Richard Nixon became Tricky Dick. And suddenly we started treating the president as somebody who wasn't above the fray. He now was just another politician. And that cheapens politics. Ronald Reagan tried to take the presidency up a notch, bring it back to where it was. And he was the president, the first president that I voted for, and the first president I served. But after Ronald Reagan, we got a succession of presidents that, starting with Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky, George W. Bush is, cocaine cowboy. Barack Obama is whatever Barack Obama is. Donald Trump is whatever Donald Trump is. Joe Biden's whatever he is. But they aren't revered entities. Barack Obama could have been. I think when he started, he could have been somebody who brought the presidency back to where it needed to be, a respected man. But by the time he finished 8 years, he was just like everybody else. And so I just think people have lost respect for their own country. They might like being an American, but how many Americans say, I love being an American? How many Americans wake up in the morning and say, this is the country I'm going to die for? I will die for this country. I will lay it all the line for this country. Most people are saying, hell no. This thing's broke. I ain't going to, maybe I'll help fix it, but it's broke. I think most Americans look at America and say, it's broke. It's broken. So I think there's a disconnect. But back when I was a teenager, America, the American dream was still a fantasy that people believed in. It hadn't been exposed as the total falsehood that it is today, perhaps. But, so I joined the military right out of high school. People joke about it today, the old saying, kill a commie for mommy, or better dead than red. It was as real as it gets. I mean, the commies were right over there, armed to the teeth, and they were coming this way. And when they did, I needed to be right here, ready to kill them. So I enlisted in the Army, and then that transitioned to the Marine Corps. And I was all about defending my country, standing up to communism, and getting ready to, lay my life down for my country. I was ready to do it.
This video is sponsored by you. That's because we don't have any sponsors. All we have are supporters like yourself. So please consider making a contribution to our channel. You can give to us via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description of this video. That way, we can continue to fly guests like Scott Ritter to our studio for an insightful podcast from which we can all benefit, like the one you're watching right now. So please consider making a contribution. Thank you for your support.
So was your father the first member of his family, or I guess of his lineage, to serve the U.S. military, or was your grandfather in the military?
My grandfather was a pilot in World War I.
Okay, so you have
my relatives, my one uncle came over Normandy, other uncle fought in Iwo Jima.
So can you talk about what it's like to grow up in a family where it's generational service? Because I always found that to be interesting. A lot of people that are in the military often are in there because their father served, their grandfather served, and I think a lot of people don't understand what it's like to grow up in a family like that. I certainly don't. So what is that like, that tradition of service and growing up in that?
Well, the first thing is that it's immersive. There's a lot of people today that I guess play computer games like Call of Duty or Medal of Honor, or I don't know, games like that. And so, they know weapon systems. They, on the computer they can talk about this, that, and the other thing. We didn't have computer games back then. I had the real thing. All I had to do was go out my back door, go to the flight line, and I could watch F-4s land. It was during the Vietnam War. Squadrons would move in, and I knew how to tell the difference between F-105, F-101, F-102, F-106, F-4, A-7, F-8. You name it, I got it. I had it all in my head. I could go watch the Marines land at Kaneohe Bay, and I could identify the Amtraks. I could identify the M48s and later the M60 tanks. I knew what kind of weapons they used. It was immersive, and not only that, but the history. Mm-hmm. My father was in the 94th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, the Hat in the Ring Squadron. Again, most people wouldn't know that. Eddie Rickenbacker. If I said Eddie Rickenbacker, most people would say, who? Well, Eddie Rickenbacker was a famous American ace from World War I. And when you remember the 94th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, you had the squadron flag. And at one point in time, if once you'd served a year into the squadron, they would give you the flag, you would take it home, and you would sign the flag in a black pen, and then your wife would embroider your name into the flag. You became a permanent part of the history of the squadron. Mm. And I remember my dad brought the flag home, and my mom was embroidering and one of the names near my dad was Eddie Rickenbacker. Mm. Eddie Rickenbacker. Eddie Rickenbacker's name's embroidered in the flag that my dad's name's being embroidered in. This is legacy stuff. This is history. This is what the military is about. And then you learn the culture, and you learn the honor and the traditions. You see your father come home and put on his uniform for a formal dinner and stuff like that. The medals on the chest, you start to look at them and say, how did you get it? So then you look on the wall and you look at the decoration, you say, for meritorious service, or for this heroic service, and then you're trying to ask your father how what he did for that, and he doesn't want to talk about it, but he wears the medals, and so you start to look around at other people and you see the medals on their chest, and you begin to learn how to read a career by reading the medals on their chest. You look at them and you can tell where they've been, what they've done. You can sort of read the measure of man. You look at the different badges for the different specialties. It's total immersion, mm-hmm. and it's all also imbued with this sense of pride, a sense of belonging, a sense of teamwork. When you're in the military, you're part of something greater than yourself. And it's, like I said, just totally immersive. To grow up in that environment, you'll hear people call themselves, I was an Air Force brat, I was an Army brat. Even if they didn't join the military, being an Air Force brat made you different than somebody who wasn't, because you knew what the military was. You know what it means to have your father gone for a year. You know what it means to be afraid to turn on the TV to hear the news, because you know that your father was in Quang Tri province, and now you turn on the news and you hear about heavy fighting in Quang Tri province and heavy American casualties, and you're like, or if your father was in F-105 squadron, you hear about the big raid in North Vietnam and 5 aircraft shot down, and you're like, one of my best friends, I remember his father was shot down. I went to school with him, and I knew his father. His father's squadron went off to Vietnam, and his father got shot down. Fortunately, his father was prisoner of war, and he was returned to, this was sort of later in the war, so he only, I think, was a prisoner for a year and a half and came back. But what that family went through was horrible. Other families, you hear the screaming at the night as the notification's delivered, is that father's dead, and then that family's gone. That's the other thing. It's like, whoop, goodbye. But it wasn't theory; it was real. This was the university of reality, being a child of a military person. And some people rebel against it. I just absorbed it. I think I was born to be in the military. I was raised, and you learn the history, you study the family history. My earliest, relatives, I guess, were Scotch-Irish indentured servants that basically ran away and tried to settle on the Appalachian frontier, and they were Indian fighters. And we have a family history that tells a story how they were chased by the Indians. They actually had to jump their horses off a waterfall and escape. The horses died, but they were able to escape. I had relatives that fought in the Revolutionary War. I had relatives that fought on both sides of in the Civil War. Again, my grandfather served as a pilot in World War I. So the whole history of America has a military aspect to it, and my family is woven into
very interesting
every aspect of it. So it's my history. Now, I know people will say, well, today, America's the nation that's only known war. America's this. That's true. And I'm not here to say this is great. You just asked me a question, what was it like to be a child like that? You absorb that history. It becomes you. It becomes part of your identity. And it's an identity that I'm very proud of. I understand the consequences of being a nation that's always at war. I understand what it's done to our reputation and all that. I totally get it, but that doesn't, in my mind, besmirch the honor that was shown by my relatives who were prepared to sacrifice everything in defense of their country. And so that was the attitude I took into going into the military.
I want to ask you a question. You mentioned patriotism earlier, and obviously you're a very patriotic person, and you should be. I think as ugly as American history can be, it can also be very beautiful and inspirational. And I'm obsessed with history, and I have always had an appreciation for American history. But obviously, coming from the Middle East, I was born in Iraq. I was born in Baghdad, and I still have family there. And I went back there before the war. I went back a month after the U.S. invasion in 2003, and I've been back several times since. And so I've seen the destruction. I felt it. I have family members that were affected and hurt by it. But I'm also an American, and so I feel more American than anything else. But I am still from the Middle East. I am still Muslim, and so I'm proud and grateful to be here. At the same time, I'm aware of every criticism imaginable about the United States. And I'm at this point in your life, I think you are as well, and you've been part of that criticism. So what is it like for you to, or how do you reconcile, I suppose, feeling that patriotism towards your country, your homeland, but also understanding how destructive, the U.S. empire has been and being critical of it? What is that like for you? Making sense of that.
Again, because my father was military, I just remember growing up, there were two framed posters on my wall as a child in my bedroom. The first one was taken from John F. Kennedy's inaugural address, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Right there on the wall. And just imagine being a kid from the very beginning, opening your eyes, and that's the first thing you see in the morning is John F. Kennedy and those words. That's what you wake up to. That's what you go to bed. And the other one was the code of conduct. I am an American fighting man, and it was basically how you behave, as if you're taken captive, and that was the other one there. So the whole concept of service to country and honor. But I was also a student of history. One of the first books my parents got me was a history of the American Indian. Now today, that of course is a politically incorrect word. We refer to there's indigenous Americans or Native Americans, but this was a history of the American Indian, and you read it, and then it causes you to want to read more. And I remember the progression of my books. I ended up reading D. Brown's "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee," and reading that, and you realize how badly we treated the Native Americans. And as a kid, I realized that. I understood exactly what we had done. I used to love the Battle of the Alamo until I read the history of the formation of Texas and how we actually stole, we're stealing Texas from the Mexicans, and then the Mexican War, how we stole land. I mean, I approached American history with a full understanding that we were the bad guy most of the time. Andrew Jackson, the Trail of Tears. I knew exactly what was going on with the Trail of Tears. I wasn't, somebody who didn't realize what was being done. And this is as a kid. Then later on, when I realized that, people took oaths to the Constitution, I would read that document. And one of the more telling things when I first read the Constitution and understood it were two things. One, the Constitution allowed slavery. And that just blew my mind. Blew my mind that we formed this country on the basis of slavery. And I went, well, that's not good. But then I read the Constitution. We, the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union. That means we know we're not perfect, that this is a struggle. This is a work in progress, that we are working to be something, that we have ideas and values that we put down there that we haven't reached that yet. We're striving to get there. It's a journey to improve ourselves, and we made a lot of mistakes on the way. But as long as we learn from those mistakes, this is why I don't reject American history. There's a lot of people out there that want to take down statues, tear down monuments and all that. I'm like, leave them up. Leave them up. So that we look at it and we say, okay, why is that statue there? What are the circumstances about it? We cannot turn our back on American history. We have to embrace it, not because we love it, because we have to learn from it. We have to learn from our mistakes. We are an imperfect nation. We were born imperfectly. We had slavery. That makes us the most imperfect of nations. We can't speak of, individual liberties when we have such a large population enslaved. But then we went through a very lengthy, imperfect process of freeing the slaves. But we never freed the slaves. It was a paper game. We still treated, African Americans like utter dog dirt. Jim Crow laws, the whole segregation, all that kind of stuff. But we worked at it. We learned as a nation that what we were doing is wrong, and we started to grow a conscience. And so then we started to work on civil liberties. I remember my dad. He was in the Air Force. He got sent to squadron officers course in Maxwell Air Force Base, I think in Birmingham, Alabama, and we were in Payne Field, Washington State. And at that time, segregation was a real thing. So all I ever saw was white people. Never saw a black person. Suddenly, we're in Montgomery, Alabama. And, my dad was a captain. You don't make that much money, so we're in a part of the city where there's nothing but black people. And I'm going, what's black people? And I was playing with black kids. I mean, because kids don't care. That's the beauty of being a kid. You don't care. There's some curiosity. You come out and you're like, oh, you're a black kid. Can I? It doesn't come off. So that's really your skin? Yeah. And you're a white guy. Yeah, I'm a white guy. But you're talking, yeah, we're cool. Hey, oh, look, let's go over there. You know, you start playing and all that. And I remember when we were playing, I remember the children, the parents of the kids that I was playing with coming over, and they shoot us apart. And they were like, they didn't want their kids playing with me because they were afraid that my parents might come in and do something. Then they realized my parents were military. And so we were just playing all that. But I remember one night, we were upstairs. My mom was pregnant with my youngest sister, and it's Alabama. It's hot, and all that. So everybody's dressed down. So my dad was in his T-shirt and his underwear, and outside we hear horrific screaming, and it was a black girl getting mugged by two white guys. And my dad ran downstairs in his bare feet, and went. And the two white guys ran away, and he chased them down a alleyway, but there was broken glass, so he's cutting his feet. But he didn't catch them, but they dropped the purse. So my dad got the purse and came back, and there were two cops there. And my dad came up and offered the purse, and he said, "I'm ready to give a statement." I said, "We don't need a statement." He's like, "Why not?" And he pulls him over. He said, "Why'd you help that?" And he used the N-word. My dad said, "Because she was being mugged." He said, "Those were white boys." He said, "Yeah." He goes, "You don't ever go against your own kind." And my dad's like, "Well, yes, you do when she's being mugged and all that stuff." But, the lady was thankful and she left. But, he came up, his feet were bleeding and all that stuff. And I just remember him talking to my mom. And we were young kids. He's talking to my mom. He's like, I don't understand the mindset here. That was the first experience with just straight up. And the funny thing is, my parents would probably kill me, but we were quasi-racist. And what I mean by that is we weren't ugly racist, but we were white people who hung out with white people.
Right.
We
There's
didn't
a
hang out
natural
with
level
black
of
people.
racism.
We inadvertently or whatever were participating in segregation, so to speak. We didn't know we were doing it, but we were doing it. But then when you're confronted with the ugliness of real racism, it's an eye opener. And I always remember, because my father, his parents were not tolerant of black people. And I remember my father telling me once, he said, "Don't look at me when it comes to race and say that's what I want to be." He said, "I'm a product of a certain time." He said, I'm working on, having an open mind, and you'll never hear bad, the N-word. We never heard the N-word. But there was a standoffishness. And his thing was, don't be like me. When we moved to Turkey, the military was starting to integrate. And so there were blacks. And I just grew up thinking that that was, because the military, it's a meritocracy. You either can do the job or you can't. You're either dark blue or light blue, in the Air Force, but you're blue. We're all part of the same team kind of thing. And my dad commanded black airmen. There were black officers. There was no problem. And he raised us to be colorblind, so to speak. But the fact is, there's horrific, ugly racism in America. America's an imperfect nation because of that to this day. But from my father, it was, you need to be better than the generation before you. A more perfect union. You need to make the country better. It's a generational process. Our failures of my generation, you have to, do better. And then your kids have to do better. And that's how we make this country perfect. So for me, patriotism was never blind obedience or blind love. Patriotism was a recognition of where we wanted to go and who we wanted to be, but also a recognition that we weren't there and we needed to get there. And that anybody who's doing something that impeded this positive progress was the problem. And that the government was more often than not the problem, and that the most patriotic thing you could do as an American was to hold the government accountable for what they do in the name. And that was a hard lesson. My dad was a huge, again, I'm giving away some things here, but a huge Barry Goldwater fan. Loved Barry Goldwater. Named our first dog after Barry Goldwater. Then later on, he was a big Richard Nixon guy. But Watergate, I just remember Watergate crushed my father, crushed him, because he just felt betrayed that his commander-in-chief, the President of the United States, lied. He just couldn't get, this just didn't calculate. And from that moment on, that was a lesson for me, because the lesson that I got was to question authority, to never take anything for granted, to do your own due diligence, and to hold people accountable. That was the lesson of Watergate for me, taught to me by my parents. And so, that's patriotism to me. Patriotism isn't blind allegiance. Patriotism is knowing what we're supposed to be, recognizing that we're not that, and doing everything you can to get to where we should be. That's what makes a patriot.
I want to ask you now, so you were a private in the Army?
I went in as a private, yeah.
You went in as a private, and you eventually became an intelligence officer in the Marine Corps?
Correct.
What does it mean to be an intelligence officer? What sort of training do you go through, and what sort of tasks do you do? Because I don't think people hear it and really understand what that means.
First of all, let's talk about intelligence. Intelligence is the art of collecting information but it's not just blanket collection. It's focused collection of information to meet informational requirements of the supported entity. You collect the information, then you assess the information, you process it, so it stops just being raw data, and now it's factored in with other things, and it's factored into the mission, into a product that is usable by the consumer to achieve a certain objective. So intelligence is a finished product that's put out there, but intelligence is also the whole process of making that happen. We talk about the intelligence collection cycle, where you have direction. The boss directs, I need to know this. Collection is taking the various capabilities and collecting the data necessary to answer that question. And then you have direction, collection, assessment, and then you feedback. So it's a loop. The assessments part, where you bring in all the other outside information, you polish and finish up a finished product, and then you brief the consumer. And then what happens at that point in time is that he'll refine his or her collection requirements and say, okay, thank you for that, but now I need to know this. And then the cycle begins all again. An intelligence officer plays a role in various aspects of these things. But then you have different kinds of intelligence. You have combat intelligence. You can have strategic intelligence. You can have tactical intelligence. It's different missions that you're supporting. In the other services, each one of these things is a specialized intelligence skill. But in the Marine Corps, at least when I went in, the 0202 amphibious intelligence officer did everything. So we were expected to be able to do it all, and it was the best job in the world. When I went into the officer training, they call it the basic school. It's after you go through officer candidate school, you get your commission, and then you spend 6 months at the basic school, where you learn how to be an infantry platoon commander. Every Marine is a rifleman. Every Marine officer is capable of leading a rifle platoon in combat. After the basic school, you go on. You can be a pilot. You can be a lawyer. You can be an intelligence officer. You can be whatever. But all of those, no matter what your job is, at the end of the day, if the enemy came through the wire, you would be able to assemble Marines, organize them into, basic, fire teams, squads, platoons, and lead them in ground combat, because that's the heart and soul of the Marine Corps. So halfway through the basic school, these guys come in from headquarters Marine Corps. They're the monitors. They're the career planners, and they set up their different booths. So infantry, everybody wants to be, if you're a Marine, you want to be infantry. So, join the infantry 0302, go in there and they, these guys, they show them, being lifted up out of helicopters, jumping out of airplanes, leading, doing the traditional Marine stuff. Good stuff. Armor, tanks, man, get into tanks. You're the Marine Corps version of General Patton. Boom. Artillery, laying down, Queen of Battle, laying down the firepower. It's awesome. Amtracks, pilots. Then they had logistics, because not everybody can be a Marine officer. Some people have to do the pride don't ride without motor T. You need to get the trucks out there and all that stuff. They had all that, and everybody's going through, because you had to pick your top three. You had to pick your number one was, your second one, and you submit them. And then what the Marine Corps does is take a look at your standing in the basic school and then the needs of the Marine Corps, and generally, and then they split it up. So they take the top 1/3, they put it here, and they spread it out. The idea is to spread out, but you tend to get one of the three that you put in. But over in the corner was this guy at the intelligence booth, and nobody was there. So I went up to him and I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Well, I'm intelligence." And I said, "Why is no one here?" And he said, "Well, because you can't be an intelligence officer straight out of the basic school. You got to go do 3 years of combat arms first. You got to be an infantry, armor, artillery. And then at the end of 3 years, if you want to be an intelligence officer, you can lateral move into it and do it." So I'm just here to tell people that at some point in time in their career, they may want to come be an intelligence officer. And I said, "What do you do in the intelligence?" And he started explaining it. You do everything. Everything. Everything an infantry officer does. Scout sniper platoon. Intelligence officer commands a scout sniper platoon. Artillery, you're running the target detection, you're forward observing, you can adjust. Armor, you're running the scout platoon out in front, leading the scout platoon. And I'm going, I want to do this. He said, "Well, you can't." I said, "But I can. This is the job I want. How do I make it happen?" He said, "Write a letter to the Commandant of the Marine Corps." So I did. And I became the first second lieutenant, direct access to the intelligence field in the Marine Corps' history.
When you say direct access, you mean you didn't have to do the 3 years?
No, I went straight in the intelligence business. And the Marine Corps didn't know what to do with me.
What are the conditions for accepting someone without those 3 years of experience?
Well,
were you like high in performing in your class? What was it that made them consider you to skip all those
there were a couple
years?
things. One, I was very high performing in my class. And two, I was a Russian studies major. I spoke Russian, and my dream job in the Marine Corps was a major position at what they call the military liaison mission in Potsdam, Germany, East Germany. Basically, you spied on the Soviet group of forces in Germany. It's an elite team of guys, 14 guys that run around in souped up Mercedes-Benz vehicles, and you spy on the Russians. You take photographs covertly. You do this, that, and the other thing. They shoot at you. They
On the other side of the wall.
You're in East Germany. You leave Berlin and you go out on patrol, and you're patrolling around. You're allowed to do it, but there's places you're not supposed to go, but you go there anyways. You shake free of your KGB handler. You go in, you take the pictures, and you come out. James Bond stuff. And I'm like, that's what I want to do. But that was a major position. But in order to do that, I had to be an intelligence officer, and I wanted to start now. I wanted to be the best prepared person for that job. But I wrote the letter, and I said, look, it wasn't as bad. I had just published an article on Soviet history in the major, it was called Soviet Studies. It's the premier academic journal for Soviet studies. And as a second lieutenant, I published an article in that. So I said, look, I'm a published author. I have the Russian history background. I have the language. It's Cold War. I want to get into this area. I want to start now. Bring me in. So they did. But the Marine Corps didn't know what to do with me because there's no positions for second lieutenants, intelligence officers. And so they sent me to 29 Palms, California, the 7th Marine Amphibious Brigade, the G2. And I remember showing up, and they were all going, what do we do with you? They didn't know what to do with me. So, which is a good thing, because what happened is normally if you're the low man on the totem pole, there's a bullet down there that says low man on the totem pole. And you go right into the low man on the totem pole. I slid in and there was no billet position. And so I became the guy that did all the stuff that that nobody else could do because there wasn't time. So my first project was to do the combat intelligence annex for the war plan for Iran.
And
which
this
means
is the,
I had
the
to
rapid
take.
deployment force?
This is part of the rapid deployment force. Yeah, we were ready to deploy at a moment's notice to the Middle East to respond to any threat. And so I did something that normally is done by a major and a lieutenant colonel. As a second lieutenant, I had to sit down and train myself to read. And, they gave it to me thinking, well, he can't do it. I come in with a finished product that blew their minds away, and they're like, damn. And so now I got to do all sorts of stuff that second lieutenants aren't meant to do.
So what did this intelligence gathering look like specifically for the Iran war?
Well, for the Iran war, basically what I was doing was going through lines of communication, route surveys. So I would have to go and get the intelligence on, what the status of the roads were, what the road construction was, when was the last time, how much weight the road could handle over a period of time. If you have a bridge, what's the capacity, the load capacity of the bridge. And then the other thing was if we need to bomb that bridge, what do we need to hit the bridge with? So I had to go through the targeting deck and make sure that, if they, 5 years ago had done a target workup for that bridge, that the Iranians hadn't upgraded the bridge, and make sure that, the munitions that we were going to put on the bridge met the current requirements. So that's that. And then the other thing you do is you have to review, because one of our things was to respond to a potential Soviet invasion. So I had to sit there and project what a Soviet invasion would look like. And then you have to come up with courses of action and lay out, the different possibilities. And then, you have to say, I think this is the most likely, this is the second most likely, and it goes into the briefing package to the commanding general. So as a second lieutenant, I'm briefing the commanding general on this thing, and it was just great exposure.
Yeah, that's impressive.
It was great exposure. And then I remember they wanted me to, they liked what I was doing. They wanted me to succeed. So to succeed, you need command time. And so they wanted to get me into an infantry battalion, because there's a scout sniper platoon in your battalion, and you become the commander of the scout sniper platoon. And so I was positioned to go there. We had an artillery unit, 5th Battalion, 11th Marines, and the intelligence officer got fired. He was the third in a row to get fired. And the reputation was that the battalion commander just hated intelligence officers. And he got fired, and now they need an intelligence officer. And I remember getting called in to the Colonel Hammond, and he says, Scott, I'm sorry. And I said, what, sir? He goes, I got to send you to 511, and this might be the end of your career, because they just chew you up. And I'm like, well, okay. So I go down to 511. I remember coming in, and I introduce myself. I have a staff sergeant, I have a corporal, and intelligence chief. I say, I'm a lieutenant. I said, what do we do? And they said, well, that's your job, sir. You're intelligence officer. I said, no, but you just tell me, what are we supposed to be doing here? And they said, well, basically we're supposed to be finding targets, better targeting and survivability for the battalion. I said, well, I don't know anything about that. I said, where do I go to learn that? And they said, well, go to the 3 shop, talk to the master guns, and maybe he can get you some schools. So I went in and I met the master guns. I said, hey, I'm dumber than dirt. I'm the intelligence officer. I need to know what you do so I can support you. So you have to train me to be you so I can support you better. And he said, okay, we're going to send you to 5 direction school. We're going to send you to forward observer school. We're going to do all this stuff. And I said, sign me up. I'm in. And then I went back. The major came in, who was the S3, the operations officer. And he was angry because his feeling was that the intelligence officer worked for him. But command and staff procedures, the intelligence officer works for the battalion commander on an equal basis with the operations officer. And so he comes storming into my office in front of my staff sergeant for my corporal. This is my first day. And he starts screaming at me, yelling at me. And I'm looking around and going, okay, this can't. So I stand up and I say, with all due respect, sir, shut up. You're in my office. You can't talk to me that way. I'm a staff officer in this battalion staff on equal standing with you before the commander. So you do not come in here and you do not address me like this in front of my staff sergeant and for my corporal. If you have a problem with me, we can go outside. We can talk about it man to man. But you get the hell out of my office. You never talk to me like. And he starts screaming at me. So the XO, who I haven't met yet, comes out of his office and he hears this, and he takes the S3 in, and I think I'm going to be fired day one. I think I'm done. And I hear yelling in there, and all of a sudden they go into the battalion commander, who I have not met yet. And so he's yelling at the 3. The next thing you know, the door slams, and the X3 marches down the hallway. He was fired. So they call me in. And the battalion, so I report, Lieutenant Ritter reporting his order, sir, reporting, I give him out. He goes, so you're the intelligence officer, huh? I said, yes, sir. And he goes, what does that mean to you, intelligence officer? What do you do for me? I said, sir, intelligence drives operations. It's a school solution. And he goes, do you believe that? I said, yes, sir, I do. He goes, good, because I just fired the S3. You get to write the annual training plan. Train my battalion to be ready to fight the new Soviet war. I'm a second lieutenant, and now I've been told to write the annual training plan for a field artillery unit, and I did, and it just took off, and it was the best experience in the world. But I did things like down at Camp Pendleton, they had something called a Q-36 radar. It's a target finding radar. So basically, you plant the radar. If the enemy fires artillery, it tracks the artillery, predicts the impact area, but it also can reverse it back to where it was fired. It's just sitting in Camp Pendleton. Nobody ever brought it out. So I started bringing out the radars, and I would use it not only to adjust fire on targets, but I would use it to move my guys. I would tell them, look, the Soviet standard is once you fire, within 3 minutes, rounds are going to be on your sight. If you haven't moved, you're going to be dead in war. We're getting ready to fight the Soviets. 3 minutes, you're dead. You fire, you've got to move. And so what I did with the radars is when our guys fired, I would plot when the enemy would fire, and then I'd be there, and 3 minutes later, on the clock, you're dead, you're done, you're out of it. And I remember the first battalion exercise, I killed the entire battalion. And everybody's mad at me, and the battalion commander comes in, and he was mad at me too. I said, sir, you told me to be realistic. I'm telling you right now, the Soviet standard's 3 minutes. None of these guys cleared station in 3 minutes after they fought. They're all dead. We just lost the war. And he listened to me, and he's like, okay, we got to get better. And he called the guys in, he chewed them out. And he said, when the lieutenant tells you, you got to be out of here in 3 minutes, you got to be out of here in 3 minutes. So we did that. We got them moving. We had to practice aircraft. I remember they made me the battalion air officer, a lieutenant intelligence officer. I had to go learn how to fly OV-10s, not fly, but to be the back seat in OV-10 so I could do forward air control and all this stuff. But I'd go down to the what they call the air conference, and I'd just sit around and wait till they have so many hours that pilots have to fly, and so they allocate them. If you need an aircraft, you put a bid in for it, and if you don't bid it, then the squadrons get to fly any way they want to. So I waited for everybody to do their bidding, and once they were done, I came in and I said, okay, how many A6 hours do you have? I want all those hours. How many F4 hours? I want all those hours. And I got all the hours, and then I would build these training exercises where I put the battalion in the field, and I'd have aircraft come in and do coordinated artillery air coordination the way we're supposed to. Nobody did before because nobody thought to bring in the airplanes. They always did. Something's called suppression of enemy air defense. Enemy air defense is here. If an airplane's coming in to drop a bomb, they're going to fire at it. So artillery's job is to suppress the enemy air defense, and then the plane comes in, and then you get it front door and back door. But it's all timing, because you don't want the airplane over the target while the artillery shells are landing. So you've got to practice the airplane hitting its IP. You have to time it so you're firing, line of flight, it's hitting, lifts, plane drops bomb on target. As it goes away, you hit it again to shut the door to make the, and it requires timing. We were the best SEAD battalion in the world because I had aircraft flying in every single training mission. We were doing real world bomb drops, using it just went on and on and on. I revolutionized my battalion as a lieutenant. It wouldn't have happened if I had done it the normal way. And because of that, I got a good reputation. And that's how I got picked to be a weapons inspector in the Soviet Union, because my battalion commander told Headquarters of Marine Corps, don't send him back to the Fleet Marine Force. He needs to be doing something bigger than that. And so they found a bigger job for me, and that's how I got to be a weapons inspector in Russia.
This video is sponsored by you. That's because we don't have any sponsors. All we have are supporters like yourself. So please consider making a contribution to our channel. You can give to us via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description of this video. That way, we can continue to fly guests like Scott Ritter to our studio for an insightful podcast from which we can all benefit, like the one you're watching right now. So please consider making a contribution. Thank you for your support.
So let's talk about that. The weapons inspection, what was that about? And what was your task specifically?
Well, the treaty was the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. It was a treaty between the Soviet Union and the United States to get rid of what they called intermediate nuclear forces. In the case of the United States, this was the U.S. Army Pershing II missile. Intermediate is based on range. So it's from, I think, 500 kilometers to 5,000 kilometers, any missile in between those two ranges. The other system that we had was called the ground launched cruise missile, sort of like the Navy's Tomahawk, but it was fired by the Air Force from a ground launcher. We deployed both of these systems into Europe in the early 1980s in response to the Soviets deploying a system called the SS-20. The SS-20 was a road mobile missile that had 3 warheads. And when they brought the SS-20 in the service, it changed the entire balance of power in Europe.
How so?
Because it's a weapon that is mobile, can't be targeted, has 3 nuclear warheads, which means they're going to saturate Europe with nuclear weapons. They could blow Europe away and not be...
Why can't it be targeted?
Because they're mobile.
But mobile on trucks, right?
Mobile on large trucks that are designed to go cross-country over terrain. It's very difficult to target these things once they get out of their
Even with
station.
satellites?
Well, remember back in those times,
They weren't
we didn't have the
sophisticated.
satellites that we have today. We
I see, okay.
different coverage. So very difficult to target. So we brought in the Pershing II and the Glickam as a counter to that. The Pershing has a very fast missile, and if it was fired, it could hit Moscow within 7 to 12 minutes of being launched, which was very destabilizing because it meant that if there was a mistake or miscalculation, the Russians would have to assume that it was a Pershing launch, and therefore they'd have to launch their missiles in anticipation. But if it was a mistake, if it was a bad glitch, they just launched, and we're now at war when we didn't need to be at war. The Pershing was a very destabilizing missile. And so the treaty was to get rid of them. And initially it was just designed to be just that. The Soviets declare all their missiles, we declare all ours. We send inspection teams to go in and verify their declaration. They do it, then we oversee the disposition, then we do follow-on inspections to make sure everything's good, and then it's done. The Soviets made a missile called the SS-25, which was similar to the SS-20, but it's an intercontinental ballistic missile. It's same concept, road mobile. It has a larger TEL, transporter electron launcher. It's a 3-stage missile. But the treaty was supposed to be signed on December 7th, or December 8th, December 7th, I think. And in November, the Soviets came in and said, we got a problem. The first stage of the SS-25 is pretty much the same as the first stage of the SS-20 missile, which means the way the treaty was written, the first stage is what's called a treaty limited item, which means it needs to be accounted for and destroyed. So now what they're saying is they have a missile that incorporates a treaty limited item, but it's an ICBM not covered by the treaty. Now what do we do? And they had a theory of inspection called perimeter portal monitoring, where you would go to a missile factory and establish a perimeter around it and monitor the portal, the only exit, monitor what comes out. And in this case, for the we would monitor SS-25 production to make sure that it wasn't covert SS-20 production. The Soviets found that to be so intrusive because originally the reason why they did that is the Soviets said, well, we want to keep some of our SS-20s. We want to keep about 80 of them in Asia, and that means that we have to continue producing low numbers of them. And we said, well, if you're going to produce them, then we have to monitor them, and then we're going to have to be at that factory and do all this stuff. And they said, that's too intrusive. We don't want you at our top secret missile factory.
Right.
But now, because they said, now we have to do that. So we took this plan that the Soviets had rejected, and now we have to implement it. And it was a plan that was incomplete, hadn't been well thought out. It was based upon the concept of a giant $12 million X-ray machine that was all theory, not reality. Technology had never been done before. And now we're talking about installing it in a remote factory 900 kilometers east of Moscow in the foothills of the Ural Mountains. As one of my colonels famously said, if something breaks, there isn't a Radio Shack around the corner. If it's broken, it's broken. This stuff needs to work. And what's interesting is that they signed a treaty and they just assumed that from the signature treaty you had 6 months until treaty entered into force, which was the 1 July of 1988. And the assumption was that the experts would figure it out. They'd figure out how to make this work. But as the time goes by, the experts were meeting, they couldn't make it work. And so what they said is the inspectors will make it work. Now understand that inspections isn't supposed to be that way. Inspectors are supposed to operate under a very rigid set of rules. There's no flexibility in inspection. You come in and you're told what you have to do. And there are limits, or right-left boundaries. You do what you're supposed to do. There's no creative thinking. There's no imagination. There's no this. Suddenly we're put in the middle of the Soviet Union to build this advanced facility out of nothing. When we arrived, I was on the advanced party. When we arrived, there was nothing there, just a field in front of the factory. We had to turn that field into, a modern facility with, warehouses, inspection facilities, rail lines, data collection centers, housing, X-ray machines, the whole thing. And we had to do it within 6 months. And so we arrived in the Soviet Union. We got to work with the Soviets to make this happen as a team effort. And it was doomed to fail. It was overly complicated, the system. We didn't have enough time. We didn't document any of the material because this is all made up. It was all theory, and now it has to be reality. And the Soviets are saying, if you're going to bring a system in, you have to have documentation. You have to show us, what each part is, what it does, why it should be here, how it's going to be installed, etc. We were sitting there going, now we're just going to dig a hole and we're going to put the stuff in there. And they're like, no. So we're fighting with the Soviets on that. That's delaying things. The X-ray machine wasn't, nobody had ever done it before. So we had to build it up in New Mexico to test it. And I remember they finally got it up. Everybody had been trained on it except me. And I get this phone call from my colonel, Colonel England. He goes, Ritter, you're going to Albuquerque with me. I said, what am I doing there? He said, you're going to get trained on cargo scan, the X-ray machine. I said, all right. So we get there, but it turns out I wasn't going to get trained on cargo scan. I was just there because the laboratory has said it's ready to be deployed. And Colonel England was the guy who said, there ain't a Radio Shack here. If it breaks, we're in trouble. It's got to work perfectly. And so he brought me in because I was the dumbest person he ever met in his life. I was very aggressive and all this stuff, but when it comes to technology, I am Mr. Can't do it. And so I was to come in to be the test dummy. And I remember the head of Sandia National Labs, Colonel England said, it's going to be there. It's got to work every time. He said, don't worry. It's idiot proof. And Colonel England looked at him and goes, that may be so, but is it marine proof? And he goes, Ritter, sit down at the console. And I pulled out the book and we started going through scenarios. And he had thought this through. I guess he had already read it, but he went through a scenario and he had me follow the book. I'm following orders just like I'm supposed to. Go into the page, push this button, go to this page, push this button. And then he comes up with an emergency scenario. A cat had walked through the radiation area. I got to stop it right now. So I go up and I hit the button, stop it. Whole system freezes. And they're like, well, that's not supposed to happen. Well, that's what it said to do. It said, emergency stop, hit emergency stop. They're like, yeah, but the whole system's frozen now. So they're trying to reboot it. They can't. It took another 5 months and about $5 million to get the system back up and running because there was an intermediate step that they had just assumed people were going to do. That there was like a reset that you're supposed to hit over here, but they didn't put it in the procedures because they just assumed that everybody knew that it's like shifting gears. You just know if you're going to shift a gear, you're supposed to put the clutch in. Everybody knows I don't have to write in put the clutch because you got to put the clutch in. Well, I'm a Marine. I just read what's I'm told to do. I didn't realize I had to do some sort of clutch work over here. I hit the button, broke the system. And so I became a hero in Colonel England's eyes at that point in time. But this is the point. The thing dragged out, and it became very political, very contentious. Senator Jesse Helms was trying to kill the inspection process, and we had to learn to work with the Soviets to make it happen, to make it succeed. We would open missiles to inspect the interior of the missiles. We had to come up with procedures to do that. One of the things we were trying to do is because we couldn't get the X-ray machine, we have to measure the stage. So the Soviets came up with something called a stage measuring device. It's basically a stick with some lights on it, and you stick the stick down into the stage, and then you look through optics and you measure the ring and this and everything and all this. And the Soviets were very proud of their work, but for us it didn't make any sense. So we kept going back and forth on what needed to be done, and so the Soviets finally produced the thing that we want. And I remember I wasn't on this inspection, but I have a very good friend who was. So they go and they pop the lid. Everybody's there. You're worried about static electricity, because if you the thing blows up. It's a solid rocket motor. Blows up, you're all dead. So everybody discharges the static. You're wearing special static clothes. They put the stick in there, and it plugs into the power, the 220 volt power in there. And they put it in there, and there's a power surge. And the light bulbs inside the missile next to the solid rocket motors blow up. And the lights go out, total darkness, and everybody's just sitting there waiting to die, because you're waiting for the static to hit, the things you ignite, and you're going to die. And about 30 seconds later, one of the Soviets cries out in Russian, "Well, boys, we're still alive." And so they quickly pulled it, get the hell out of there. But it's, this is the kind of weird stuff that's going on. We're making procedures as we go along, which you're not supposed to do. Long story short, I don't want to bore your audience to death. We made it work. We made it work. It wasn't supposed to work. There was a crisis where the Soviets rejected the use of the cargo scan because they said it exceeded the parameters of the treaty. We said it didn't. The Soviets were right, and they didn't allow 3 missiles to be inspected. They sent them through when they were supposed to be inspected, and it could have ended the treaty, could have ended the whole thing. Big, huge crisis. But we sent a delegation from Washington, D.C., and remember I said that Washington had punted to the inspectors and said to the inspector, well, we had the solution. We happened to have 2 very junior officers who were geniuses, and they knew the treaty inside out, and they had worked with the Soviets. They listened to the Soviets. And when the big delegation came in, they convinced them that the Soviets were right, that the Soviets were actually correct on the interpretation. And so we fixed it based upon the local knowledge that was developed, because they trusted us to do this. And they saved the treaty, and I say that they saved the world, because if that treaty had failed, we'd have these missile systems, and there would have been a mistake. The missiles would have been launched. We'd all be dead. But because we worked our way through this, in the middle of the Soviet Union, in the middle of a town where no foreigners had ever been before, at a ballistic missile factory, and like I said, in a strange nation, we worked with our Soviet counterparts and made a miracle happen. We saved this treaty. It's one of the most remarkable stories in arms control history.
I think this is a good opportunity to transition to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and using this as an opportunity to segue from this era in which you had what seemed like a disarmament, right? Or at least drastically reducing the amount of nuclear warheads to create a more stable and peaceful world. Now we're hearing reports, Putin is announcing a new type of weapon recently. I don't know the specifics. I'm sure you do. But what is it like to witness the rising of tensions after the hard work that you and others did to disarm and create a more peaceful and collaborative environment? What is it like witnessing that transition to a more, what seems like unstable, highly tense, dangerous world in which there are new weapons being introduced? And now there was this, it was probably mostly propaganda, but they're talking about Putin wants to put nuclear weapons in space. Just the conversations about nuclear weapons returning to the news. What is that like for you to witness?
No, it's it's very depressing, because as I said, we did something that was remarkable, what we accomplished with the INF Treaty. And it was based upon mutual respect, reciprocity. There was no superior side. The Soviets were our equals in this treaty, and we treated them as equals, and they treated us as equals, and that's why it worked. Then the the Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed. And what happened is we lost respect for Russia. Russia went from being the Soviet Union to being this failed nation state that is begging for help. And Russia was willing to do things to make compromises and arms control to save money, to cut costs. And we took advantage of that to use the arms control process to gain a unilateral advantage, strategic advantage over Russia, qualitatively, etc. And the Russians were okay with that as long as we maintained the basic framework of arms control. One of the foundational elements of that is the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which was signed in 1972, that basically said neither side will have meaningful anti-ballistic missile capabilities, so that everybody knows that if we do go to war, we all die, mutually assured destruction. And George W. Bush came in and said, I don't like that. We're America. We're the superpower. And I don't like mutually assured destruction. I don't want any Americans to be destroyed. We're going to pull out of the ABM treaty and build a missile defense. And the Russians are saying, don't do that. That's destabilizing. If you do that, you build a missile defense, you're creating a situation where you could attack us first. And if we respond, you can shoot down our missiles. And then you have the strategic advantage, and we lose deterrence, and then you can bully us. We don't want you to do that. Don't worry, we're not here to pick on you. Meanwhile, while we're saying we're not here to pick on you, we promised them that we wouldn't expand NATO. Not 1 inch eastward, James Baker told Edward Shevardnadze and Mikhail Gorbachev. Meanwhile, while we're pulling out of the ABM treaty, we're expanding NATO right up to Russia's borders. And the Russians are going, what are you doing with this NATO expansion? And then we deploy anti-ballistic missile systems in Poland and Romania. And the Russians are saying, what are you doing? Don't worry about it. It's not really, you don't have to worry about it. It's not a threat. And the Russians are going, but that's derived from the Mark 41 Aegis system on a ship, that the canisters not only can fire the SM-3 missile, but they can also fire the Tomahawk cruise missile. So you're putting the ability to launch a land-based cruise missile right next to the Russian border. And we're saying, no, we would never do that. We were lying, because we were developing that capability all along. In 2018, Donald Trump pulls out of the INF treaty, ends the INF treaty. And the first thing we do a week after is test a land-based cruise missile from the Mark 41 ashore system that's in Poland, Romania, proving that the Russians were right not to trust us, that we were lying all along. We violated all these treaties to seek this unilateral advantage. In 2007, Putin spoke to the Munich Security Conference and told them, you're destroying everything that made security possible, and you're behaving in a way that makes it difficult for us to trust you. We ignored him. In 2018, he gave a speech where he said, because of what you've done, I have no choice but to build new categories of nuclear weapons that can overcome your missile defense. We asked you not to do this. Are you listening now? We weren't. And now recently he gave a speech where he said, those missiles I said that I was developing, they're developed, they're done, they're deployed. We can kill you. We have the best nuclear weapons in the world. You can't stop them. Your missile defense doesn't work. What are you going to do about that now? We've destabilized. The Russians don't trust us because when the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia was weak, we negotiated in bad faith. America is not a good partner because we only believe in America. We don't believe in mutual reciprocity. We won't believe in respect. We won't respect somebody unless they've earned that respect, and they only earn that respect when they can destroy us. And so Russia's taken the position that in order to get back to arms control, Russia has to be able to destroy America. And Russia can do that right now. They have the best nuclear force in the world, better than anything we have. We can't touch it. We don't even know if ours works. Our nuclear force is so old right now that we're getting ready to modernize it. It's going to cost us over $1.5 trillion to modernize it at a time when budgets are already, strained. We're in a very bad position with this. But the worst part is we behave as if we're still this superpower with unmatched capability. We have a nuclear doctrine that was developed after 9/11 that speaks of nuclear preemption. basically it says that any threat that manifests itself in the world of a sufficient quantity, whether or not it's nuclear or weapons of mass destruction, it doesn't matter what the threat is, we have the right to preemptively take that threat out using nuclear weapons. Basically what we're telling the world is we can use nuclear weapons anytime we want to, for any reason we want to. There was a Trump administration official that said, our goal is to have the Russian and Chinese leadership go to bed each night not knowing if America is going to nuke them the next morning. That's insanity. But that's the American posture. So what the Russians have done is say, well, we're not happy with that. So we're going to make sure that no matter what your posture is, we can strike back. Now, the Russian posture for nuclear weapons is if nuclear weapons are used against them first, they will retaliate with overwhelming force. Or if an enemy creates a conventional threat, non-nuclear threat, that threatens the existential survival of Russia, then Russia can respond nuclearly. For instance, in the Ukrainian conflict, right now you have the United States and others talking about the return of Crimea to Ukraine. Crimea is Russia. It belongs to Russia right now. I know the United States and Europe don't agree with that, but Russia calls it Russia. Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk, 4 new territories. They're part of Russia. Ukraine says they want them back. The United States and Europe say we're going to help you get that back. That means that you have to go to war against Russia. You're threatening the existential survival of Russia. Russia would use nuclear weapons. This is the situation we're in right now, where the president of France says that there's no red lines, that he can send French troops into Ukraine to fight the Russians anytime he wants to. But if he does that, then Russia will destroy those French troops, creating a general conflict between NATO and Russia, which will lead to a nuclear war. Do American people know that right now, if the president of France commits French troops to Ukraine, that they're going to die? Did Congress debate this? Did the President of the United States agree to this? Or are we going to let a French president hold us hostage?
And why is Macron doing this? Why is he making this threat?
Because Macron's embarrassed. Macron was somebody who, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, said he didn't want Europe to become a battleground between 2 superpowers, the United States and Russia. That Europe needs to make sure that the United States doesn't, allow a situation to develop where Europe becomes the battleground, that Europe should be looking at developing its own security interests independent of the United States. But then the Russians went into Ukraine, and the United States was able to bully and cajole not only Paris, not only France, but Germany, Italy, Great Britain into leaning forward supporting Ukraine. They bought into the notion that that this was an issue of existential importance to NATO. If Ukraine fell, NATO would collapse. And Macron bought into that. He's leaning forward. He's providing weapons. He's providing assistance. He's working with the allies to do this. They're leaning way forward, expecting America to be leaning forward with them. And suddenly America pulls back. And Macron's left there alone. And he's embarrassed, humiliated. And so what he's doing is trying to save face. So he's trying to act tough, trying to generate power. But if he ever acts on it, we're going to go to war and we're all going to die. But here's another thing, too. Americans may not realize what happened. Russia has a presidential election taking place right now. On March 12th, these 3 Russian militias fighting on behalf of Ukraine invaded Russia in Belgorod and Kursk. They were defeated, but they invaded and they fought over several days. Over 2,500 troops, 36 tanks, dozens of infantry fighting vehicles, including M2 Bradleys. They're going in. The purpose of it, they admit, is to disrupt the presidential elections, to prevent Russians from voting, and to create the impression of a weak Russian leadership so that maybe they won't get support. So it's a direct interference in the presidential elections of Russia. These 2,500 guys are controlled by the military intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. The CIA in 2014 entered a strategic relationship with the military intelligence department of the Ukrainian intelligence. They built 12 bases along the Ukrainian-Russian border to spy on Russia and to prepare offensive operations against Russia. These Russian entities are, even though they're under the auspices of the Ukrainian military intelligence, they're CIA private armies, just like what we did in Afghanistan, just like we did in Syria. It's a CIA private army. The CIA has built a private army that it is sent into Russia, has invaded Russia to disrupt presidential elections. Now, for the American audience, let's put this in perspective. What if Russia went to Mexico and worked with the Mexican drug cartels and built 12 bases along the U.S.-Mexican border to carry out covert operations on American soil? What if Russia got Mexican Americans, American citizens who are angry at America for whatever reason, come to Mexico, organize into a large strike force, and then told them on the eve of American election, invade America to disrupt the election? Would Americans go, don't worry about it? We say, no, it's an act of war. It's an invasion. We'd be speaking of war with Mexico. We'd be speaking of war with Russia for being involved in that. We would never let that happen. Why do we think it's okay for the CIA to do that today in Russia, knowing that the invasion of Russian soil begins a process where the Russians can talk about an existential threat to their survival that could trigger a nuclear weapons response? Do Americans know that right now, as we speak, the CIA is invading Russia with a CIA private army, and the end result could be that none of them wake up tomorrow morning? How many Americans are aware of that? No one cares. No one knows. That's where we are today. We have the French able to destroy life on the planet by acting on their own. Where's the president to tell the French, not on our life? I mean, if I were the president of the United States, I pick up the phone and say, you ain't going to go into Ukraine, because the second you do that, I'll sink your ship. I'm not letting you start a nuclear war. Stand down. You're just France. You don't get to do this. And I would tell the CIA, cease and desist. What the hell are you doing sending troops across the border invading Russia?
So this is obviously a major escalation. Why do you think Putin has been so measured and relaxed with his response? It seems like they're trying to bait Putin to maybe escalate on his end, but I think he's been patient and he's been playing it out correctly. Why do you think he's, kind of tolerating these incursions into Russian territory, attacks on civilian populations, when you have the drone strikes that hit civilian towers and things like that? Why is Putin taking it from this perspective where he wants to respond, but in a patient and measured manner?
Well, let's look at it from the Ukrainian perspective for a second. They're losing, hands down. And there's no amount of military assistance, weapons, money that can be brought in that's going to change this outcome. The strategic, imperative has gone over to Russia. Russia is now on the path towards a decisive victory. The only thing that could change that outcome is if NATO intervenes. So now, put on your Russia hat. You're winning. Sanctions haven't worked. You've not only survived sanctions, but you've rebounded it on Europe and the United States. The European economy is collapsing. You're getting stronger. Your economy is performing in ways that nobody ever thought it would. So you don't want to disrupt this. You're doing well on it. Your military is operating on all cylinders. You're winning the war on the ground. Your defense industry is up and running. You're producing millions of rounds of ammunition. Europe can't produce any ammunition. You're getting 30,000 guys to volunteer a month to go to war. Patriots. Ukraine can't get anybody to volunteer. They have to kidnap people. NATO is dysfunctional. Yes, you lose a ship or two in the Black Sea. Yes, they blow up an oil refinery here. Yes, they do a drone strike there. But it doesn't change the strategic outcome. Right now, as things stand, Russia wins. So why would you do something that is the biggest gift possible to the Ukrainians? Why would you overreact and do something that could possibly precipitate a NATO response?
So even though it's an incredibly dangerous escalation to send 2,500 troops across the border with U.S. equipment, Putin still understands, while this is a red line, you just crossed it. I'm not moving from my position because my position, is the best position for me to be in.
I'm going to kill those 2,500 guys, destroy 36 tanks and all your equipment, and then I'm just going to be cool about it.
Right.
I'm
so
not
it seems
gonna
like
overreact.
they're aware that these escalations will continue to take place, and they're just preparing their border defenses and et cetera, to tolerate them and deal with them.
They are on a path towards victory, and they're not going to do anything to cause them to deviate from that path. Right now, they're, according to a very senior Russian general with direct combat experience on the front, by May, the belief is that the Ukrainians will be unable to hold the current positions and they will have to withdraw to the Dnieper River, a strategic withdrawal. And that will probably precipitate a general collapse on the part of the Ukrainian military because they don't have the resources, and Russia will exploit that. And by September, Russia will be in Odessa, Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, and the war will be over. So that's the trajectory they're on. Why do anything to upset that?
I want to ask you this question. Let's say you were put in command of the Ukrainian armed forces tomorrow. What would you do to make the most out of this almost impossible situation? I guess, obviously, defining victory is important first for Ukraine at this point. But if you were to play to Ukrainian strengths, what would you do differently against the Russians?
I would go ahead and withdraw to the Dnieper River and preserve as much of my combat power as possible. I would create a flexible defense approach outside of Odessa, similar to what the Russians did outside of in Zaporizhia, to basically make the Russians come into my strength, so to make them pay a price. I would do the same thing to the west of Kharkov, create flexible defense, and I would make the Russians come to me, and I would make them pay as dear a price as possible. Meanwhile, while I'm doing that, I would go to Kiev and I would kill Zelensky, take over the Ukrainian parliament, declare martial law, and tell the Russians we're ready to bring this thing to an end. If you want to fight, bring it on. I'll fight you. I'm organized to do that right now, and I'm going to kill as many of you bastards as I can. I'm going to slaughter you. You may win, but I'm going to kill so many of you, it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory. So come at me. I'll crush you. You may kill me in the end. You're going to kill me in the end. I accept that. But I'm going to kill so many of you, it's going to hurt. But right now, I'm willing to talk terms. We can bring this thing to an end. I'll give you Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk. Those are yours. But I get to keep Odessa. I get to keep Kharkov. I get to keep these others.
And it's important to keep Odessa because it seems like that would be their only port on the Black Sea, correct?
Yeah, the problem is Russia's probably not going to let them keep Odessa because, unfortunately, Ukraine has shown that Odessa in the hands of a power that potentially is hostile to Russia is a strategic threat to Crimea and the Black Sea. So I don't see Russia allowing this war to end.
So let's say Ukraine makes peace with the Russians, and there is then, I'm assuming, going to be some type of economic collaboration to rebuild Ukraine and to service Russia, not just strategically, but also, you're right next door. We might as well do business with each other. What sort of things could Russia do after the war to improve relations with Ukraine and economically redevelop? Like, is it as simple as turning back on the gas pipelines, investing in the country?
I think, again, it depends on the political solution that's reached. I look to Chechnya and the Chechen model as a guide. They fought two wars. There was a lot of hatred. People talk about the enmity between Russia and Ukraine today. Think about what it was between Russians and the Chechens. It was a bloodbath. They hated each other. Look at Chechnya and Russia today. The Chechens voluntarily send tens of thousands of troops to fight side by side with the Russians against the Ukrainians. Chechnya is a thriving nation, Grozny, which looked like Stalingrad in 2002, is a modern, thriving city. Chechnya is doing quite well. That could be Ukraine. One of the things about the Chechen model is that the money that Chechnya earns through energy production doesn't go to Russia; it stays in Chechnya. So you could theoretically come up with a scenario that allowed Ukraine to avoid, sending money to Moscow, where Ukraine would invest its resources directly into Ukraine, just like the Chechens do. You could come up with a model where Russian cities collaborate with Ukrainian cities to rebuild, revitalize. There's no reason why Ukraine couldn't be a economically viable part of a Russian
sphere of influence,
whatever we want to call it. I mean, there's some people who think that Russia is going to absorb Ukraine. Other people think that Ukraine will remain an independent state along the line of Belarus. I don't know how it's going to be, but the bottom line is whatever Ukraine is, there's no reason why it can't thrive. But the key there is mutual respect. The Chechnya is a Muslim country, a Muslim republic. They are defined by their faith, and yet they're part of a Russian Orthodox federation. Ukraine has a significant percentage of their population which is Greek Catholic. There's no reason why the Greek Catholics and the Orthodox can't peacefully coexist and live together and stuff. The Chechen model is a good model to base a potential reconstruction model of Ukraine on.
Let me ask you this. So this war is, I think, correctly perceived as being dangerous, unnecessary, and almost counter to U.S. interests. But I'd like you, if you can, to play, I guess, devil's advocate, or to say it differently, put yourself in the shoes of whoever is behind this from the United States' perspective, the instigation of this war to try and destabilize Russia. Is there any way to look at this war as actually being in the interests of the American people?
No. There's no way you can spin this war to be in the interest of American, because we failed at everything we wanted to achieve. I mean, in theory, when we were starting to do this, the theory was that we would keep Russia down, that we would never allow Russia to stand on its own 2 feet, that we would have a Russia return to the era of the 90s. We wanted a Yeltsin 2.0. We don't want Putin. In theory, if we could have successfully implemented what we wanted, we would have had a weak Russia, et cetera. And then you could, in theory, say that it was better for the United States, although I think it's unrealistic given the fact that Russia's a nuclear power and it could have precipitated a nuclear conflict. It's sort of stupid thinking to talk about bringing Russia down. We lost our greatest asset when it came to managing Russia, and that was the interwoven character of the Russian economy and the Western economy that had developed from the 90s and continued up until 2022. Fully 30% of Russia was tightly interwoven with the Western economy, and that gave the West tremendous leverage over Russian politics, et cetera. Putin had to engage in certain policies because he couldn't alienate the West. The West was a reality. The oligarchs continued to leech onto Russia because of this relationship. It weakened the Russian economy. So if I'm an American that wants Russia weak, the last thing I would do is sanction Russia. What I would do is encourage more Western trade with Russia to further dilute, Russia's economic unity, to further ingratiate Russia in with the West. And yet we did the exact opposite. We sanctioned them, and then we froze all the assets of the oligarchs, destroying their viability, and we compelled Russia to go through shock therapy to restructure its economy so that there's no interwoven nature with the West. We've lost all leverage. We have no way to leverage ourselves on the Russian economy today. Sanctions have failed. The more we sanction them, the stronger Russia gets. So, we failed there. And the same thing, if we had ever been mature about allowing Russia to develop as a democratic nation, the best thing we could have done was maintain massive indirect influence on the Russian economy, which translates into influence on the political establishment that runs the Russian economy. And so, rather than trying to force the issue by recruiting a Navalny and trying to insert them in there, what you do is you just let the Russians create their own Navalny. No outside interference. Let it create their, because there was enough corruption in Russia that Navalny could have been created naturally. And now you have a viable opposition. And now you can begin the process of divide and conquer politically, not because you're directed, because it's going to happen, because you've set a condition through the economic engagement with Russia. This is what a smart CIA guy would have done, the indirect approach. But we can't do that. We don't have the patience for it. We don't have the vision. We have to be in control, manage everything. And as a result, we overplayed our hand. And today, Russia has been freed of all the potential points of leverage that the United States could have had over its economic, social, and political development. Russia now is truly an independent, sovereign state, self-sufficient, stronger than it's ever been. And, in a way, I view that as a good thing. I always believe that it's best that we deal with a nation that's living up to its full potential, because then it's an honest relationship based upon genuine capabilities. I don't like the idea of the United States exploiting a weaker nation to try and manipulate outcomes. I think that's bad policy. So I like a stronger Russia.
Here's why I ask that question. Russia obviously has, if not the most, they have the second most amount of natural resources on Earth. They are on the eastern flank of Europe. They're not sandwiched between other competitive, highly developed Western European nations. And so while they have a large Western border, they do have the luxury to, they're not Poland sandwiched between Germany and Russia in World War II. And so they have a tremendous amount of resources. And the way I view, if I were to look at it from the U.S.'s perspective, let's say, the way I view it is that the Russians, by virtue of their existence as a unified state with the most amount of resources, they have the biggest bones to grow into. And so if the U.S. didn't instigate this conflict and sever the relationship economically between Russia and Western Europe, then they may have allowed Russia, not because they're not a threat today, but maybe in 50 years, if left alone, continuing to do business with Germany, Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, getting economic investment from Germany that perhaps in 50 years, then they could really challenge U.S. power in Western Europe. So from that perspective, does that make sense to you as maybe trying to stiff arm them well in advance, even though they should be maybe more focused on China, who's a closer peer competitor? But do you understand what I'm saying? Russia's ability to grow into the natural abilities they have as a unified state.
Well, that was the whole purpose of the American policy was to prevent that from happening. Our goal was to weaken Russia, keep Russia weak, to divide Russia, to have Russia break up into several constituent parts. Neither one by themselves could represent a threat to the United States, and we wanted to keep them from, consolidating this potential under a single entity. So we failed. We got the exact opposite of strong Russia. But there's a couple problems with the scenario you put out. One, it presupposes that America has a right to be an unmatched, unsurpassed power, and that sustaining that is an obligation. If that's the case, then we'll be in perpetual conflict with the entire world. And the other one, it suggests that America is unable to compete on equal terms with the world. That in order for us to be competitive, we have to game the system. And that shows that we're the weak party. I think the problem is that the United States lacks the imagination at this point in time to envision a world where we are equal to other powers. Whenever America closes its eyes and imagines the world that we want to live in, it's always America on the top, America calling the shots. Those days are over. We ain't the shot callers anymore. What we need to do now is work to a world where nobody's the shot caller. And the Russians and the Chinese at this point in time appear to be satisfied with that. They're talking about a multipolar world where, the rights of all nations are considered. Now, you hypothesize what happens in 50 years when Russia grows into its capabilities. But why is Russia the only nation growing? Imagine how strong and competitive the United States would be if we stopped posturing militarily and we started posturing economically. Imagine if we diverted 1/10 of our military budget into the State Department so that we had more meaningful engagement, diplomatic engagement with the world. Imagine if we worked with the Africans the way the Russians work with the Africans, without any preconditions, without trying to impose a moral agenda, where we were just looking for a mutually beneficial relationship. I think we could find that America is a natural fit to many places in the world. We could outcompete both China and Russia if we dropped the you must do it the American way attitude. China comes in just as a straight up business deal. Russia's doing the same thing. Why can't we? Why do we always have to bring in entire annexes of preconditions based upon, American, social values? Why do we insist that, nations buy into diversity if they're going to do business with us? Russians ain't putting a diversity clause in their contract. China's not putting a diversity clause in their contract, but we do. We have these preconditions. If America learns to compete properly, Russia won't be the only one growing. We'll be growing too. And I think what you'll find is that the nations will grow to where they naturally should be. And at that point in time, we now have defined what a multipolar world looks like. And then we can get around restructuring things like the United Nations, the Security Council composition, based upon this new reality. Once we let nations shake out to where they should be, we'll probably find that neither France nor England belong on the Security Council. They're pathetically small European nations. Why aren't we letting India and Brazil, South Africa? I think the world's going to reimagine itself going forward. But if we play our cards right, the one of the parts of this reimagination is a strong and prosperous America that is competing as equals with a strong and prosperous Russia, a strong and prosperous China, a strong and prosperous Europe.
So I'd like to transition to Palestine now before we wrap up. I appreciate you giving us all this time. So we're in Tampa. Obviously, you're very popular with the Muslim community now and the Palestinian community. You probably have been for years, but I think after October 7th, with all your coverage on Palestine and your analysis, which has been great, I think you've become quite the celebrity in our community. And so we went, for the viewers who don't know, we took you to a couple of restaurants, and random people would come up and say, "Hey, you're Scott Ritter." They didn't even see you; they just heard you talking to us, and they're like, "I recognize that voice," and they wanted to take a picture with you. And so you're really appreciated and respected, I think, in this community of people that want to see Palestinians gain their rights, and that's because of your analysis. That's because of you getting on Judge Napolitano and other YouTube channels to discuss the Palestine issue. So I want to talk to you about October 7th specifically. I produced a video for Propaganda & Co. that went viral that tried to bring the conversation back to what actually happened, because there was, the atrocity propaganda. Afterwards, we were all talking about what didn't happen. Okay, these atrocity propaganda lies didn't happen, the beheaded babies, et cetera, et cetera. So we wanted to bring the conversation back to what actually happened. And we sourced a lot of that information from the article that you wrote, breaking down the attack on October 7th tactically. Now, because I don't want to get demonetized or deplatformed, let's just talk about it from a tactical perspective. October 7th, resistance fighters in Gaza, who we'll refer to them instead of using their actual name, but the resistance fighters in Gaza carried out some sort of attack on October 7th. From a military tactical perspective, can you share with us what you wrote in the article?
Sure, but it's more than just a military tactical. It was a strategic operation.
Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, I will. But I just want everybody who's listening to close your eyes for a second and imagine the world on October 6th. Ask yourself the question of, well, what was the status of Palestinian statehood? And I think almost everybody would agree that there was no movement at all on Palestinian statehood. What was happening in the world, there's people were talking about a India Middle East economic corridor linking India through United Arab Emirates, through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, into Israel, and from the port of Haifa onto Greece and Europe. And just imagine, just listen to what I said. A economic corridor linking the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. The world was talking about integrating Israel into a greater economic cooperation scheme. That's what they were talking about. When Benjamin Netanyahu spoke at the United Nations General Assembly, the General Assembly debate in September of last year, he showed a map talking about this corridor. On that map, he had a depiction of the state of Israel. Nowhere in there was a Palestinian state. Nobody was talking about a Palestinian state. And that's the point I'm trying to make. On October 6th, a Palestinian state wasn't even in the imagination of anybody, realistically speaking. After October 7th, that's all people are talking about. That's the strategic implication of what happened there. That's the shift. And you have to look at it. So now, how did that shift occur? Now we come down to the nuts and bolts of it. In order for that to happen, whoever planned this operation needed to create the conditions to change global opinion. How do you change global? Let's reverse engineer it. Instead of starting at the small level, let's bring it in from the big picture. So now we're talking Palestinian statehood is on the agenda. The world's talking about that. But to make that happen, the world has to agree that there is a need for a Palestinian state. But if the world opinion prior to that on October 6th wasn't there, was siding with Israel or was just ignoring it, how do you get that? You have to generate something that can trigger change on a global scale. And in order to do that, you have to change the dynamic that is involved in how the world views Israel. So you're going to have to get Israel to do something that changes global opinion about Israel. So the thing you want Israel to do is that which Israel is inclined to do through their doctrine. And we know this because of the experience of 2006 in Lebanon, when Israel fought a 33-day war with Hezbollah to a standstill and was so angry and frustrated that they carried out a policy of collective punishment on the Lebanese population of West Beirut. I think it's a suburb, the Dahiwa suburb. I'm sure I'm saying that word wrong, but the people know what I'm talking about. Indiscriminate bombing, slaughtering of civilians, not for a military objective, but to punish the civilians for supporting Hezbollah. This was now official Israeli doctrine. The Air Force bragged about this mowing the grass thing. So how do you get Israel to do this? You have to create an incident that provokes Israel into carrying out these literal war crimes. So now what does that entail? It's not firing rockets. The resistance fires rockets all the time. It doesn't precipitate that. It doesn't even have to be it can't be an act of terrorism, because random acts of terrorism have occurred over time that don't necessarily precipitate. It has to be a massive action that shocks the sensibility of Israel. a raid. See, a raid is a unique military operation. It involves leaving a prepared defensive position, advancing into enemy territory to carry out a variety of objectives, and then to withdraw back to prepared defensive positions. Oftentimes, the raid is designed to lure the enemy in pursuit so they can be ambushed. So now, that's exactly what Hamas did. Now, to do that, Hamas needed to do a couple things. First of all, the Israelis had near perfect intelligence coverage of Gaza. They had surveillance everywhere. So Hamas, if they're going to lure the Israelis into an ambush situation, they have to create a scenario where the Israelis don't have perfect intelligence. So your attack, your raid, has to neutralize the Israeli intelligence capacity. This included the array of sensors along the border, the cameras that looked in there, the radio intercept capabilities, human intelligence monitoring. All of these things became targets that had to be attacked by Hezbollah and neutralized. They had to embarrass the Israelis because it couldn't just be an attack that could be repulsed. They had to attack on a scope and scale that inflicted casualties on the Israelis. And so it had to be a raid that had to have an element of violence attached to it, violence on contact with the enemy, to assault through, to carry out. And then the most important part was to seize hostages, prisoners, to capture prisoners in sufficient quantity that Israel couldn't ignore it, and bring them back to Gaza and bed them down and force Israel to come after them, compel Israel to come into Gaza. So the raid takes place. They blind Israel. They take out all of the cameras. They deafen Israel, blow up all the repeating stations. They attack the Human Intelligence Center and got all the computers with all the names of all the collaborators. Look what happened on October 8th. Bodies started appearing throughout Gaza. Bodies of the collaborators. The Israelis were made totally blind. So now as they come into Gaza, they're coming in a uncontrolled fashion. They're coming in groping their way through, which gives the advantage again to Hamas to attack them where they can. They force the Israelis to carry out not targeted missions, but sweeping broad bombardments to do what Israel was preconditioned to do, collective punishment of the Palestinian people. And as they did this, world opinion began to turn. And as the war extended, because Hamas was planning a long-term campaign, the resistance was planning a long-term campaign, the longer this campaign goes on, the more atrocities are committed by the Israelis, and the more the world begins to turn. This was perhaps the most well-planned strategic military operation in modern history. And it has achieved every objective that it sought out to achieve. The resistance was never going to defeat Israel in a stand-up fight. They're not designed to do that. Israel set the condition of victory of being the total defeat of Hamas. 6 months in, Hamas operates everywhere in Gaza. Everywhere in Gaza. Northern Gaza, central Gaza, southern Gaza, everywhere. Israel controls nothing. Controlling the surface of Gaza is nothing, because Hamas built the battleground underground, in the tunnels. The most optimistic assessment put out there is that Hamas has lost 20% of their tunnels. They still have 80% of their tunnel network there. The most pessimistic estimate of Hamas losses, they've lost 35% of their combat power. The other estimate shows that they may have lost only 10% of the combat power, but the bottom line is Hamas has not been eradicated as a combat force. It's still there, able to continue the resistance. Politically, they are more powerful today than they've ever been, because, again, I just state On October 6th, what was the Palestinian Liberation Authority doing? What was the PLA doing for Palestinian statehood? Nothing. What was Fatah doing for Palestinian statehood? Nothing. On October 7th, the only entity doing something for Palestinian statehood was the Gaza-based resistance. And today they're recognized by virtually every Palestinian out there as the only one that's standing up for Palestinian statehood. They're more empowered politically than they have ever been. So they fought the Israelis to a standstill on the ground. They've expanded their prestige and viability politically. And the world is turning on Israel to the point where right now everybody, even the United States, agrees that the only solution is one that talks about the creation of a Palestinian state. This is a strategic victory on the part of the resistance of Gaza, and it has to be viewed that way. It's hard to celebrate this because of the death and suffering that's taken place. We were talking over 30,000 innocent women and children, 18,000 children. These are mind-boggling numbers. But during World War II, the United States and the Allies launched a campaign to liberate France. It began in Normandy, the Normandy campaign. And Charles de Gaulle was brought in and briefed by the Allied commanders about the need to bombard the Norman countryside. And he was told that the Allies would kill between 80 and 120,000 French civilians to liberate Normandy. That the Allies would kill between 80 and 120,000. The actual number turned out to be 60,000. To liberate Normandy, we killed 60,000 French civilians. Because of that number, Charles de Gaulle never attended a D-Day anniversary celebration because he couldn't celebrate something that cost France so much. But he also realized that the only way France was going to be liberated from Nazi occupation was for an operation to take place, knowing that that operation was going to result in so many dead French civilians. I believe that the resistance in Gaza understood what was going to happen, understood that the only way you were going to change international opinion was by compelling the Israelis to do something that equates to genocide, and indeed has been called genocide by the International Court of Justice in most nations around the world. And that these 30,000 dead should be considered 30,000 martyrs, 30,000 heroes, 30,000 patriots who shed their blood, gave their lives for the cause of a Palestinian state. Because there wouldn't be a Palestinian state without their sacrifice. There can't be a Palestinian state without their sacrifice. And if you view it in that way, I think it helps you not go insane. Because if you don't put a value to their sacrifice, if you don't give meaning to their death, then you just see images of dead children and dead women and dead men, and you'll go insane. You'll lose your mind. But if you view them as this heroic sacrifice for a cause, the Sinwar, the head of the resistance political organization, wrote a book, Thorn Incarnation, and he talks about his experience growing up in Gaza. And one thing you come across is, he speaks about generations of Palestinians who knew only the camps. Only the camps, that's all they knew. Children of the camps. The generation of Palestinian youth today were born in the camps. And October 6th, their only future was to die in the camps. Maybe after living a certain life, maybe dying on an Israeli bomb, but they were going to die prisoners in the camps under Israeli occupation. That was their fate. And if they ever got married and had children, that was the fate of their children. That was the fate of their parents. That was the fate of their grandparents. They were all children of the camps. Because of the sacrifice of these Gazans today, there's a chance that the next generation of Palestinian children won't be children of the camps, but they'll be children of a free Palestinian state. But But that could only happen because of the sacrifice that was made by these 30,000 courageous Gazan Palestinian civilians.
I want to ask you this last question about the continued resistance. So I don't have the name of the Israeli commander, but there was some type of commander, I don't think they were a general, but some type of Israeli commander in the IDF talking about how the resistance was difficult to locate in Gaza currently because they're operating in a decentralized and autonomous fashion. The way I understand it is that you essentially have pockets, a handful of guys, one with a camera, one with their weapon, and they're sleeper cells, essentially, hiding out in the rubble, in the tunnels, in the homes, and they just wait for an opportunity, and then they act autonomously. Is that the correct way to think about it?
Yeah. If the resistance operated as a collective with centralized logistics, etc., what would happen if they authorized under conventional means? You'd have a commander in Gaza have to communicate back, hey, we're running low on ammo. You need to move ammo up here. And so what you have is communications that the Israelis can intercept. And then you have the movement of material and personnel that the Israelis can detect and interdict. And so you create more opportunities for the Israelis to destroy you. However, if you overlay your defense and you make everybody a cell, self-sufficient cell, knowing that if that cell gets cut off, there's nothing you can do for them. They're dead. You can't help. If they run out of ammo, they're dead. These are disposable cells. That's a hard way to go about life, but that's it. But what happens is they're out there and there's no communication. The Israelis can't hear anything. There's nobody talking to anybody. There's no movement of material. It's all there. And so the Israelis have to go in and find each different node. And in doing so, they expose themselves. And then they get hit. And yes, they may take out that cell, but there's the next one right over here. They pop up and they get them. There's another one over here that pops up and gets them. And that's the resistance right now. And when you take the potential of 60 to 85,000 men and you break them down into 3 to 5 man cells, that's a whole bunch of 3 to 5 man cells hanging out there, sipping water, eating a date, waiting with an RPG for the Israelis to make a mistake. And the Israelis make mistakes every single day because they're afraid, because they're tired, because they're nervous, because they don't understand the battlefield they're in, because nothing makes sense. What looks like a secure facility isn't a secure facility. Wherever they go, they become exposed to potential attack, and it wears on their nerves. And the resistance is just hitting them every day, wearing them down. Israel will never defeat them because there's nothing to defeat. You know, you spend all your effort, you get a cell, okay, but there's another cell that you don't know where it is. And it's going to pop up and you're going to lose 2 guys. Another cell pops up, you lose 7 guys. Another cell pops up, you lose 3 guys. And it's just a death of 1,000 cuts. And I think that's the situation that we face right now in Gaza.
Okay, Mr. Scott Ritter, thank you so much for partaking in this podcast. It was wonderful to have you here in Tampa, Florida. We also had a live event that we documented. We'll be sharing that online as well. So I just wanted to thank you again for taking the time, especially at this late hour during the month of Ramadan, taking the time, to converse with us and share your knowledge with our audience. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I hope we get to do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
This video is sponsored by you. That's because we don't have any sponsors. All we have are supporters like yourself. So please consider making a contribution to our channel. You can give to us via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description of this video. That way, we can continue to fly guests like Scott Ritter to our studio for an insightful podcast from which we can all benefit, like the one you're watching right now. So please consider making a contribution. Thank you for your support.
Trust nothing. No